I'm going to talk about fasting. Now, when people speak about fasting, unless they qualify it, it's not clear what it is that they mean. You have juice diets, you have fruit diets, and you have all types of diet restrictions, which are often referred to as fasting. Now, fasting is abstinence. It means the abstinence from all food. All right, we take water. And we might argue, of course, that water is a nutrient, but it isn't. Water is necessary for the body's utilization of nutrients, for the body's use of nutrients. Water itself is not a nutrient, but one doesn't get very far without water. We know the human body can go a long time without food. In fact, in the Postgraduate Medical Journal in 1974, there was a discussion of a man who went 382 days without eating. Fasting. That's a long time. So the body can go a long time without food, but it can't go very long without water. In fact, I'm absolutely amazed about the arguments and discussions on euthanasia. If a person wants to commit suicide, it's very easy. Stop eating and stop drinking. You've only got 2 or 3 weeks. And it's not a terribly unpleasant death. You more or less just sink into a coma eventually. But there are all sorts of peculiar and exotic means of terminating life. However, we're not here for that reason. We're here to enhance life, to encourage life, to support life, and to see how we can maintain life in the best possible way for the longest possible time. Now, it is important to realize health is an ordinary language word. Health is not a medical term. And we all have different views of health, and it's one of those nouns which can be used in a variety of contexts. We talk about a bank balance being healthy. We talk about health being all sorts of things except what it is. Health relates to the condition of the organism. That's the important thing. Now, health, we think, is a contrast with disease. Now, health and disease are not antagonistic opposites. They're merely different points on the same continuum of health. There are varying degrees of health. There is no such thing as absolute health. So health is basically a relative term. So we wish to encourage, through lifestyle and intelligent living, a level of health far above the ordinary or the average. Now, it's very important to realize that the organism is always the hero. It is the body that acts in any situation. Medical people frequently refer to their drugs acting. Drugs do not act, they have effects. Now, to illustrate that, I can suggest to you that we have a couple of bodies lying on the floor here, one alive and one dead. Give them both a laxative. Only one is going to act. Because the action is the action of the living organism. Now, many, many years ago, I visited Scotland. And I visited a very famous clinic there called the Kingston Clinic. Now, whilst I was there, I was told an interesting story about a man who purchased a very run-down property in Scotland. The garden that he purchased was a total wilderness, absolutely rough and ready. But this man, he worked diligently for many weeks, for many months, until the garden became the most beautiful in the whole neighborhood. And people used to come from miles around to see this beautiful garden. One day the local priest came along and he saw the man working in his garden. And he said to it, "It's a beautiful garden you have here." And the man said, "Yes, and I've done it all myself." "No," said the priest, "with the help of the Lord." He said, "All right, with the help of the Lord, but you should have seen it when he was doing it by himself." Now, the important point there is that the man was not providing the growth of the plants. He was not providing the essence of life. He was merely manipulating the factors of the environment, whereas the plants, they had the inherent ability to grow, to develop, and to flourish. And that's the important difference. Now, with human health, we have no control over the processes of the body insofar as the life processes are concerned. That's inherent in the organism. It's innate. Healing is a biological process. It's very important to understand that. Therefore, there is no such person as a healer. There's no such thing as a healing agent. There's no such thing as a cure. There's no such thing as a chemical, a drug, a food, or any other ingredient that will take the place of the living process, the processes of life. Now, all healing is self-healing. Healing is not something that somebody else does to you. It's something you do for yourself. Now, the hygienic system comes in when it's a question of manipulating the factors to get the best possible outcome from the living organism. The miracle is in the living process itself. But what the doctor can do, he can make decisions about lifestyle which can enhance the person's life or even destroy the person's life. And the choice is, generally speaking, it is yours. You have to make those decisions. Now, when we talk about fasting, we mean the total abstinence from all food. You take water and water only. There's a very good reason for that, which I'll get to in just a moment. So all other things do not relate to fasting. Fasting is from an old Anglo-Saxon word, which means to abstain. So if they say you're on a fruit fast, it means you're abstaining from fruit. If you're on a juice fast, it means you're abstaining from juices. The total fasting that we refer to is water only. Now, how long can a person fast? Well, I've already indicated it can be many months. Now, people point out to me that The Irish terrorists, I prefer to call them, the gentlemen of the IRA who did so much damage in Ireland many years ago, many of these people, they went on a hunger strike. One of the first was Terence MacSweeney, who was the mayor of Cork, and he fasted as a result of his protest. Bobby Sands was another of these rebels who fasted. Now, I think MacSweeney fasted about 75 days. Sands was considerably less. Now, in these cases, the people fasting were not fasting hygienically. For instance, one of them was a confirmed chain smoker. So he was smoking all the way through. Another was on calorie-free drinks, various soft drinks. No sugar, of course, no sugar. So we cannot use these people as examples of fasting. As we all are aware, and probably have forgotten, fasting is mentioned many times in the Bible. Jesus is said to have fasted 40 days. Elijah fasted 40 days. It seems from the biblical word that 40 days was the length of time that you fasted if you fasted for religious purposes. Well, certainly, you're getting well into a good fast when you do 40 days. In fact, just a few weeks ago, we had somebody who completed 40 days. But that's, of course, for different reasons. Now, what happens when we fast? Well, we go without food, don't we? We're not eating. So, immediately the brain has to start cogitating and thinking, what am I going to do? There's no food coming in. The blood sugar level is falling. There's a crisis on its hands. So a series of changes start to occur. The body mobilizes glycogen in the liver and the muscles. This is, of course, an animal form of carbohydrate, an animal starch, if you like. This can be easily converted to sugar. But unfortunately, this doesn't last very long. So we have to think, the brain has to work out how it's going to support metabolism. It hasn't got many reserves of glycogen to go for a long period of time. But it has another major source of energy, a very rich source of energy, twice as valuable as glucose. You're getting around 4 calories a gram from glucose. But from fat, this depot that many of us have far too much of, provides 9 calories a gram. So it's an extremely rich source of energy. And gradually that's what the body will utilize. Even in 24 hours or even less than that of fasting, just going from the evening meal to the breakfast meal. And not many people these days would do that. They'd probably have 2 or 3 snacks in between times. Even going for a fairly lengthy period overnight, from say 5, 6 in the evening to 8, 9 the next morning, we find that fatty acids are building up in the blood. Because the brain's a pretty intelligent organ. It's already worked out when no food has been coming in for many hours, it has to prepare for an unthinkable eventuality that no food's going to come. So it's going to start conservatism and how people ate conservatism. But that's what it's going to do. So the blood pressure is going to drop. blood sugar level is going to fall. And of course we know if the blood sugar level falls too much, the person's life is threatened. It's not possible for it to just keep falling. And if it does fall too much, we do have to act. And it's very important to know what that blood sugar level is. And in supervision that we provide at the clinic, we are monitoring the blood sugar level, particularly on the first day, the second day. Not so much as the fast progresses, because it remains fairly stable, and gradually later in the fast it actually comes back up again quite considerably. Now I'm not going to get into discussions of blood sugar level, because you in America use different standards from what we use. So the expressions of our system would probably be relatively unintelligible to you. But the blood sugar level falls, and this is supported by glycogen from your liver, muscles circulating in the blood and the tissues. And then we get the evolution of ketosis. Now you probably all know what ketones are. That nail polish remover that stinks so much, that is a ketone. Ketones refer to a group of chemicals which have a certain formula. Now, we go into ketosis probably on the late second or early third day. We start to see them coming into the urine when we test the urine. Now, the ketones seem to be limited in their production, but nevertheless adequate to provide energy to the body. Because now the body is switching from utilizing carbohydrate as a source of energy to utilizing fat as a source of energy. The basic currency of energy for the person with the normal blood sugar level, of course, is glucose. The basic currency of energy for the person surviving on fat are ketones. Now, what we're doing here, the chemistry of the body, the metabolism of the body's use of its nutrients and its excretion of waste, and its basic biological processes are radically changing. And this is one of the key issues about fasting. You're not only changing the way the person feels, you are actually changing the way they are. Hence, here is reason for the many advantages and the many recoveries and the many incredible actions that take place in the body during a fast. So after 3 or 4 days, we're in ketosis. They can be measured. It's usually around 16 millimoles a litre being excreted. That usually remains fairly stable until either 1, we run out of fat in the body, or 2, we terminate the fast. Talking about running out of fat, that's virtually impossible in modern society. If you work out that people have probably 1/3 of their body weight as fat, and in some cases actually more than that, we have had people at the clinic, 52% of their body weight was fat. That's over half. And I have read in the journals of people who are considerably more than that. So at 9 calories a gram, you can do an awful lot of fasting. The only problem with that reasoning is the fact that the body needs more than just energy. Other nutrients are required too. And those nutrients may be very important to the normal function of the body, And as the fast progresses, indications of nutritional problems may arise. This is usually not in the first few weeks. We're usually looking at 2 to 3 months before this sort of thing would occur. Now, as the fast goes on, how does the person themselves feel? One imagines that the deprivation of food will create an enormous weakness. And it is true that some people do get quite weak. But usually they recover from it without eating. Because this is the withdrawal of stimulation. They're used to eating their 3 to 10 meals a day, depending on their appetite. And as they go along, they feel pain when they go without a meal. If they don't have breakfast at 7 or 8 in the morning, by 10 o'clock they've got an abdominal pain. They feel weak and listless, nervous, irritable. Oh, I must have something to eat. They only weigh 200 or 300 pounds. But they already perceive that they're going into severe starvation. Well, I've got news for them. That's not true. Now, it's very important that we distinguish between fasting and starving. Fasting is the total abstinence from all food while nutritional reserves of the body remain adequate to support life and normal function. Now, obviously, there is going to be a point where you will run out of reserves. Whether it's 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months down the track. When I visited Dr. Shelton many years ago, I met a gentleman there who had fasted during the Second World War at Dr. Shelton's place. It was very interesting to talk to him. When he started the fast, he was 2 years and 3 months old, and he weighed 32 pounds. He fasted for 47 days with paralytic poliomyelitis. At the end of the fast, he weighed a mere 15 pounds. When I met him, of course, he was a grown man. And I was interested to learn how he recovered from that long fast, 47 days, at only 2 years of age. I'm sorry, but I wouldn't have, shall we say, I wouldn't have the guts to do it. I think Dr. Shelton was indeed a remarkable man. A remarkable man. And I understand that when you're practicing hygiene over many years, you gain confidence in the body's ability not only to survive, but to regenerate, to rejuvenate. And rejuvenation, that is to make young again, is one of the things that can occur as a result of fasting. Not, mind you, a few days. It's usually a long fast where you get rejuvenation. But according to the physiologists, rejuvenation can only be achieved by nutritional stringency, fasting. That's a stage of fasting that usually occurs, or starts to occur, after the first stage of fasting. The first stage of fasting is when we're going through the ability to utilize the material in the digestive tract, in the glands of the body, circulating in the blood and body fluids. And once these are exhausted, we reach this second stage. From the second stage on, we do start to get genuine rejuvenation. Much of the work in this area was done at the University of Chicago. And one of the assistants, one of the people who did most of the fasting, under the supervision of the professor who was doing the experimental work, was a man named Frederick Holzer. He wrote a book, eventually, called A Devotion to Nutrition, recounting his experiences as a subject used by Professor Carlson and others at the university as a subject in fasting. So, rejuvenation, what does that mean? As I said, it means to make young again. How do we determine that? Well, when we enter the second stage of fasting, there are several biochemical changes that occur in the body, and these can be elucidated by a number of fairly straightforward laboratory tests. Now, when we talk about rejuvenation, this doesn't mean the rejuvenation that you see in much more primitive organisms. Many of the rejuvenation studies that you'll read about were done on planaria, flatworms. And Professor Childs at Chicago found that when he took these planaria, fasted them, fasted and fed them alternately, they outlived 19 generations of the control worms. But of course he never got to the end of it, because he could have gone on fasting and feeding and fasting and feeding. So great was the rejuvenation that if they'd have continued in that way, theoretically the worms would have lived forever. Now, I can't promise you'll do that. I know a lot of you are trying. But as I always say, I'm not really worried about how long I live. I'm concerned about the quality of life that I have while I'm here. I mean, I find that many of my contemporaries are not in very good shape. They have respiratory problems. They have joint problems. They have bowel problems. They have skin problems. They have thinking problems, cogitating. All of these that we put down as diseases of old age. Now, nobody in society is really old. I mean, in Australia, you get a personal letter from the Queen if you reach 100. Now, 100 is a pretty good lifespan when you consider it against the average. But I believe that biologically, the human being is capable of living considerably longer than that, under the right conditions and circumstances. And that's where it comes in. That is where the doctor is at his best. Modifying, regulating, controlling the circumstances, the conditions under which we live. What type of diet, how much food, how much rest, how much sleep, how much exercise, how much worry, not justified, how much anxiety, not justified. When one considers the activities of life, you find that many people do not live in present time. They're either living in the past or they're dreaming about the future. It is very important in your life to stay in present time. The present is a gift. That's how you should think of it. And that's where you should live. Now, as the fast progresses, the person is losing weight. How much weight are they losing? Well, in some instances where I've had people who've been grossly overweight, they might lose 5-6 kilos in a day. But we're going to talk more about the normal person. The fact that some people are packing in the reserves on a regular daily basis, way beyond they'll ever need, is not the issue. The issue is to maintain a quality of life where you have a state of functional excellence which allows you to get the best from the organism. The best mentally and the best physically. And the best spiritually if you're in that area. So we find the average weight loss for the so-called normal person who is of limited weight is usually around about a pound a day. But like the airlines, we have found out over the years that people weigh more than they used to. The airlines have to regulate the weight of the passengers from time to time. Otherwise, of course, the way things were going, they had standards which were developed after the Second World War, and they found in the last few years that these are no longer applicable. The planes were having much more difficulty getting off the runway. Now that's a very anxiety-creating situation. So we have a situation in Australia where we're just a little bit behind America when it comes to obesity. I think America's about the obesity capital of the world. Certainly where we live, it's only a matter of about 20 miles to the obesity capital of Australia. Now, fasting, as I've often said, is a great way to lose weight. But it's also a great way to gain weight. I have found, in fact I can remember a lady many years ago, suffered with chronic asthma. One of the worst cases I've ever seen. She was on short-term relief, Ventolin. She was on Pulmicort, which is more of a longer lasting effect. And she was also on regular steroids, which is, of course, generally bad news. When I first saw her, she weighed 68 pounds. When I talked to her and her family about fasting, it wasn't very well received. Anyway, this lady actually fasted 14 days. And over the next 3 months, she improved enormously. Oh no, the asthma didn't go away just like that. But it was able to be managed without the massive quantity of drugs that she was previously taking. Obviously, the lady, who was pretty old, did not make a full recovery. And often we find that in our hygienic work, that people have come to us with one foot in the grave and the other on a banana peel. The time for action would have been 10, 20, 30 years ago. And of course they've been up and down the medical gamut and have been deteriorating all the while. So obviously, radical change is needed. And often we get what I refer to as a good practical recovery. Certainly the person still has a few symptoms. Certainly they have fairly extreme limitations about the way they can pressure the organism, the way they can innovate it. But at the same time, they have a quality of life far better than they ever had before. Now, as we progress through the fast, is the person getting weaker? Not generally. I have had people who were so weak when we started, they couldn't even get out of bed. And yet after 20 or 30 days, they're walking around. Not because the fasting is doing it. And once again, we get back to this question of the action. Action presupposes an actor, i.e. the body. So whenever action occurs in the body, that action is performed by the body. And why is this important? A person takes a drug and they're told the action of the drug is such and such. No, it isn't. That is the effect of the drug. Any action comes from the actor, the body. Why is that important? Because that action is being supported energetically by the body. That energy is coming from the body. So the body is being debilitated by that loss of energy, by that utilization of energy, by that consumption of the patient. So therefore, we have to see in terms of energy being liberated from the organism and performing its processes. Very important to understand that healing is a biological process, that it is not something that can be done by any outside agency or therapy. Healing is this biological process which is in continual operation, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week throughout your life. The physician's job is to harness, to influence this energy, to make sure that the energy is acting remediably. As I said earlier, health is the normal state of the organism. We don't have to make people healthy, but we do have to make them sick. Health is the normal state, given the normal needs of life, the normal conditions of life. Obviously, there are many people, unfortunately, born with genetic problems. They don't have a normal body to begin with. They don't have normal equipment. So they do have an immediate problem. And fasting is not generally going to change that very much. But one thing it will do, it will take the pressure off the organism. It will enable the organism to function a little bit better, because many of the so-called causes of disease have been removed. As I said a moment ago, we don't make people healthy. Health is a normal response to the care that the body receives, to the food, the air, water, sunlight, rest, sleep, mental and emotional factors. All of these things come in to contribute to your health or lack of it. Now, with fasting, we're concerned about health and its recovery. People recover through fasting, but not by fasting. What do I mean by that? Fasting per se does nothing. It's merely a physiological rest. Nothing is done by the fast, it's done by the body during the fast. So fasting then is a condition under which we're placing the body temporarily so that it can work more efficiently. Now we realize that when we eat, we're expending energy on what? On eating, on masticating, on digesting, on absorbing, on circulating. And so far we've got these nutrients to a point where they're digested, absorbed and circulated in the body. And so far, all we've done is expend energy. We've got nothing back from it. If we're very fortunate and the food is really worthwhile, when it's metabolized at the cellular level, we may get a little bit more energy back than we've actually spent. But as you've probably observed when you've watched your friends and relatives and people around you, eating is a very energy expensive business, particularly the way that some people can shovel food into their mouth in enormous quantities. And they masticate it in such a fashion, briefly, unfortunately, as though they've never eaten food before. Now this enthusiasm is great, but it's very energy expensive. Now just think, you go on a fast, which we sometimes call a physiological rest, because that's what it is. A lot of the energy that's normally spent on eating and utilizing food is not expended when you're fasting, because the food is already in the body where it is. And when you're fasting, don't think you're living without food. You're merely living on food that you've previously eaten. The food is already in the cells. It's already there. We know, for instance, a person can go a long, long while without eating. Months. They can go quite a while, like a couple of weeks, without drinking. But try going more than a few minutes without breathing. It's not going to work, I can assure you. Before you try it, I don't want you trying it. I don't want somebody sending a message to me that they passed out after 20 minutes. It's not going to make that long. So there's a relative importance here. And that tells you something while I'm passing this spot, about breathing, the importance of breathing. What's the first thing you learn in first aid? Is the person breathing? Is anything inhibiting the respiratory function? Very important, isn't it? You're not worried about whether they're moving the bowels. And I like to discuss the bowels. You know, there are those people around who live from one bowel motion to the next. I haven't been to the toilet in 3 weeks. Oh my goodness. So what? Always think this way. Whatever's in the bowel is outside the body. Your body has a hole through the middle. What's in the hole is not in your body. It's still outside the body. It has to be absorbed into the body to get into the body from the bowel. So what's in the bowel is really not a great deal of concern. I've had a lady who was 88 years old who hadn't had a bowel motion for 6.5 weeks. Well, of course, she wasn't eating very much either. But there are these people, unless they go 8:40 every morning, they got constipation. Look, you look after your business and let the bowels look after theirs. That's the best way to go about it. If your diet and lifestyle is reasonable, your bowels are going to act. I can guarantee it. Unless you've got a cook plugging in. So you must not think that your health is dependent on bowel motions. Certainly the healthy people will have better bowel motions than the unhealthy people. No question about that. But that goes for virtually all functions. So fasting then is normal. Why do I say that? Because fasting is almost as common in nature as feeding. Animals fast in a wide variety of conditions, and especially when they're sick and wounded, sick and injured. But if you've looked at your own history, commonly when you get sick, particularly when you get feverish and sick, when it's an acute sickness rather than a chronic sickness, what's one of the first things that happens? You lose your appetite. You'll find in the medical books, when they're describing the symptoms of these various febrile diseases, anorexia, loss of appetite. So the body is telling us something. What we think in hygiene is that we should listen to what the body's telling us. If we're tired, we should rest. But no, instead of that, we take a stimulant to force ourselves to go a bit longer. I mean, when I arrived from Australia a couple of days ago, it was a 14-hour flight. And it's not that easy to get a really good night's sleep in an aircraft. Not only was the flight 14 hours, but I was still on Australian time, which was the middle of the night, and here it was the middle of the day. This is a considerably enervating influence. Certainly with intelligent management, you're not going to sit down and eat a large lunch because it happens to be the middle of the day. You're going to be eating according to your appetite. If you're not hungry, don't eat. If you've got anorexia, you shouldn't eat. If there's one thing if I could get one thing across to you very seriously, and that is try to interpret what the body is telling you. Because usually it gives you these messages. Many, many people have come to me with very, very serious, sometimes terminal illnesses. And they've said it just came out of the blue. I got no warning. I didn't know. I'm sorry, I don't believe it. When I question people who have evolved serious, chronic, maybe terminal disease, there have been many indications that they should change their behavior, that they should modify their lifestyle, they should take note of what the body is telling them, but they don't. Why is that? Mainly because of habit. We talk a lot about habits, good habits, bad habits. I don't believe, really, seriously, there's any such thing as a good habit. Habits tend to be bad anyway. Making a habit of anything. People say, oh, I drink a glass of clear, fresh water first thing in the morning. That's a regular habit. Well, maybe you should change it. Why not drink it at night? No, I think you get the message here. The important thing is, habits will kill us. But you won't live long enough without habits. They're obviously important. But just do not live by habit alone. Live by this. In fact, that's where we all live, in here. And that is where people make the errors, the mistakes, because of their preoccupation with relatively unimportant things. There are those people who've learned very early in life to worry. And it doesn't take much to make them worry. And when you sit down with them and analyze the worries, they've got really nothing to worry about. There are people, and you see them on the television occasionally, people around the world who don't know where the next mouthful of food's coming from. They don't have fresh drinking water available. In our society here, we don't know how lucky we are. Worrying should be made illegal. It's so unproductive. All you're doing is damage. So therefore, here what I'm trying to say to you is there are many aspects of life. And we have to think about every aspect of life if we're going to think of high-level health. But what do people do? They get sick. Oh, I must be combining my foods wrongly. I must be eating too much broccoli. And they say to me, are oranges better than grapefruits? People are so preoccupied with diet, they think that's the be-all and end-all of health. Certainly diet's important. Your body's constructed of what you eat. It's vital. Pay attention to it, sure, but don't look upon it as the Holy Grail. I've known many people in my life whose diets have been excellent, but they've never been well. And this happens because life is more than food. And I've got the job of talking about this in a couple of days' time. Because it's an essential point. And the point about hygiene is, it's the lifestyle you lead. It is how you feed yourself, how you exercise, how you rest, how you sleep, how you deal with your problems up here. And fasting is a means to an end. You can't go through your life fasting. But an occasional fast is important. My wife and I, we fast from time to time. When do we fast? Well, we always avoid Sunday. That's a day of rest, so we've got to be eating then. But with fasting, we should fast when the body tells us to. You're weak, debilitated, off your food, anorexic. The body's telling you, fast, fast, and wait until you're really genuinely hungry again. Don't just wait a couple of hours till you get that severe abdominal pain. Hunger is not pain. If you get pain when you go without eating, there is something wrong. It is not pain to be hungry. Hunger is more of a mouth and throat sensation. Watch your dogs or your wild animals when they get hungry. Saliva running from their mouth. That's what we see with fasting. People who fast a long time and they're genuinely hungry. Increased saliva in the mouth. In fact, sometimes they'll complain to me. They've been sleeping in the night and the pillow's all wet. Saliva's been running out. They're hungry. That's what hunger's all about, not pain. Certainly if you eat when you've got pain in the stomach, it may relieve the pain. But you're eating for the wrong reason. Fasting is a vast subject. I could talk all day and all night about it. But unfortunately, I'm going to get frantic waving from my friend at the back there. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, There are many books here, quite a few books on fasting. You have one of the greatest establishments in the universe, here in Santa Rosa, where they conduct fasts and they do the thing the right way, the proper way. They're not kidding people. You do it properly. You'll probably have the opportunity to visit the establishment. And of course, it's one of the finest places you could go to if you're in need of any help with your health. But if you will listen to what we've got to say this next few days, you shouldn't have a great need for doctors. You should be able to interpret what the body's telling you and get on with the business of living. Thank you.